The autumn evening was settling over the city of Hartford, Connecticut, bringing with it a chill that made everyone hurry a little faster toward their destinations. It was 7:45 p.m., and Judge Sarah Thompson was finally heading home after another grueling day at the courthouse. Sarah had spent 12 hours presiding over complex cases, and her mind was still processing the day's events. She had changed from her judicial robes into more comfortable clothing, a simple gray sweater and black pants, before leaving the courthouse. Her natural hair was pulled back in a neat bun, and she wore minimal makeup, showing the fatigue of the long day on her face. The streets were quieter now, with most commuters already home. Sarah's dark blue Toyota Camry cruised smoothly along Winchester Avenue, her thoughts drifting to the simple dinner she planned to prepare. At 45 years old, she had served on the bench for 8 years, earning respect from her colleagues for her fair judgments and thorough understanding of the law. Red and blue lights suddenly flashed in her rearview mirror. Sarah checked her speedometer. She was going exactly the speed limit. She glanced at her dashboard to confirm all her lights were working, which they were. With 15 years of legal experience before becoming a judge, she knew exactly how traffic stops should proceed. Sarah carefully pulled over to the right side of the road, positioning her car well away from traffic. She turned off the engine, placed her hands on the steering wheel at 10 and 2 o'clock, and reached over slowly to retrieve her registration and insurance from the glove compartment, placing them on the dashboard alongside her wallet. 2 police officers emerged from their patrol car. Through her side mirror, Sarah could see them approaching, Officers Mike Brennan and James Cooper, though she didn't know their names yet. Brennan was a tall, broad-shouldered man with short brown hair, while Cooper was slightly shorter with a military-style haircut. Both were white and appeared to be in their early 30s. Officer Brennan approached the driver's side window while Cooper stood slightly behind, his hand resting near his holster, a detail Sarah didn't miss. She waited for Brennan to reach her window before pressing the button to lower it. "License and registration," Brennan demanded, his flashlight beam hitting Sarah's face directly, causing her to squint. His tone was sharp, lacking the professional courtesy she had observed in her courtroom when officers testified. "Good evening, officer," Sarah replied calmly. "May I ask why I've been pulled over?" "License and registration first," Brennan repeated, his voice growing firmer. "We'll get to that." Sarah kept her composure, though she felt her heart rate increasing, not from guilt, but from the recognition of a situation she had heard described countless times in her courtroom. "Officer, I understand you need to see my documents, and I have them ready. However, I believe I have the right to know why I've been stopped." Cooper stepped forward then, his stance becoming more aggressive. "Ma'am, when an officer gives you an order, you comply first, ask questions later. That's how this works." Sarah noticed how quickly the situation was escalating. Despite her position and knowledge of the law, she was being treated like a suspect rather than a citizen. She reached slowly for her documents, maintaining steady eye contact with Brennan through his flashlight beam. "I'm reaching for my documents now," she narrated her movements clearly, knowing this was standard safety protocol. "They're right here on my dashboard." As she handed over her license and registration, she noticed Brennan's expression shift slightly as he read her name, but he didn't seem to make any connection. Instead, he passed the documents to Cooper for verification. "Step out of the vehicle, Miss Thompson," Brennan ordered, his hand moving to rest on his belt. "Officer, I don't understand the reason for." "Step out of the vehicle now." His voice rose sharply, echoing in the quiet street. Sarah felt a chill that had nothing to do with the autumn air. In this moment, she wasn't Judge Sarah Thompson of the Superior Court. To these officers, she was just another black woman they had decided to view as a threat. As she reached for her door handle, she knew this traffic stop was about to become something much more significant than either officer could imagine. Sarah's door creaked open slowly as she followed the officer's commands. The evening air felt colder now, or perhaps it was the tension making her shiver. Officer Brennan stepped back, his hand still hovering near his weapon, while Officer Cooper moved closer to provide backup. "Keep your hands where we can see them," Cooper barked, his flashlight beam following her every movement. Sarah emerged from her vehicle with deliberate care, her movements slow and precise. Her legal training screamed in her mind about the improper procedures being followed, but her survival instinct told her to remain calm and compliant. "Officers, I'd like to understand what violation you've observed. Sarah spoke clearly, her voice steady despite her racing heart. I was following all traffic laws, and my vehicle is in perfect working order. Brennan circled around her, his boots scraping against the asphalt. We'll ask the questions here, ma'am. Are you aware that your left taillight is out? Sarah's brow furrowed. She had just checked all her lights yesterday during routine maintenance. Officer, that's incorrect. My lights were all functioning when I left work just 15 minutes ago. Are you calling me a liar? Brennan's tone sharpened dangerously. Cooper moved closer, creating a more intimidating presence. Not at all, officer, Sarah replied carefully. I'm simply stating a fact. You're welcome to verify it yourself. Additionally, I would appreciate if you would call for a supervisor to be present. The mention of a supervisor seemed to anger both officers. Cooper stepped forward, his face tight with barely contained frustration. Listen here, we don't need a supervisor to handle a simple traffic stop. You're being unnecessarily difficult. Sarah stood her ground, though every instinct told her to back down. Officers, I am well aware of proper police procedure, and I have the right to request a supervisor's presence during any traffic stop. Oh, so you're a lawyer now? Brennan sneered, exchanging a knowing look with his partner. Let me guess, you've watched a lot of Law and Order. I'm quite familiar with the law, Sarah responded, maintaining her composure. And I'm also aware that this stop appears to lack probable cause. Cooper moved suddenly, closing the distance between them. Turn around and place your hands on the vehicle. On what grounds? Sarah questioned, her heart pounding harder now. I've shown no aggression or resistance. Your continued questioning of our authority is resistance, Brennan declared. Turn around now, or we'll assist you. Sarah knew this crucial moment could go two ways. She could reveal her identity as a judge, which might either resolve the situation or escalate it further if they didn't believe her. Or she could comply and document everything for what would inevitably become a serious departmental investigation. I want to be clear that I'm complying under protest, Sarah stated firmly, turning to face her car. This is an illegal detention, and I will be filing a formal complaint. Of course you will, Cooper muttered, roughly grabbing her wrist to pull it behind her back. Sarah winced at his unnecessary force. Officer, you're using excessive force. I'm not resisting. Brennan joined in, securing her other arm as the cold metal of handcuffs clicked around her wrists. You have the right to remain silent. Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law. Sarah almost laughed at the irony of being Mirandized. If they only knew how many times she had ruled on the proper application of Miranda rights in her courtroom. You have the right to an attorney, Cooper continued, tightening the cuffs an extra notch. If you cannot afford an attorney, one will be appointed for you. As they led her toward their patrol car, Sarah noticed several bystanders had stopped to record the incident on their phones. She held her head high, knowing that this moment would soon become a powerful lesson about racial bias and police misconduct. Watch your head, Brennan said mockingly as he pushed her into the back seat, not actually caring if she hit her head or not. As the door slammed shut, Sarah sat straight in the uncomfortable seat, her hands painfully restrained behind her back. She began mentally documenting every detail, every procedural violation, and every word spoken. Soon, these officers would learn exactly who they had arrested, and this night would change not only their careers but potentially the entire department's approach to traffic stops. The patrol car's interior smelled of stale coffee and cleaning products as they drove through the darkening streets of Hartford. Sarah observed every turn, every stop, noting how Officer Cooper deliberately took a longer route to the station. She'd driven these streets countless times heading to and from the courthouse, and she knew they were adding unnecessary time to the journey. From the front seat, Brennan radioed in. Dispatch, we're bringing in one for disorderly conduct and resisting a lawful order. ETA 15 minutes. Sarah listened as dispatch acknowledged, knowing full well there was no basis for either charge. Through the partition, she could hear the officers' conversation, though they clearly thought she couldn't. Can you believe these people? Cooper muttered to his partner. Always think they know more about the law than we do. Yeah, did you hear her asking for a supervisor? Brennan chuckled. Probably saw that move on YouTube. Sarah shifted uncomfortably in her seat, the handcuffs digging into her wrists. The dashboard clock read 8:23 p.m. Nearly 40 minutes had passed since the initial stop. Her absence would soon be noticed. Judge Sarah Thompson never missed her evening call with her mother, a ritual that had started when she first became a judge. "Officers," Sarah spoke up clearly, "I want to inform you that these cuffs are unnecessarily tight and causing pain. Would you please adjust them? Maybe if you cooperated from the beginning, we wouldn't be here." Cooper called back, not even turning his head. Sarah took a deep breath. "I'd like to speak with your watch commander when we arrive at the station." This time, both officers laughed. "Lady, you'll speak to whoever we tell you to speak to," Brennan responded. "You're not in charge here." The irony of his statement almost made Sarah smile, despite the situation. She watched through the window as they passed the courthouse where she presided over cases just hours earlier. The building stood dark now, but tomorrow it would be buzzing with activity that would likely include addressing this very incident. Finally, they pulled into the police station parking lot. Sarah recognized several vehicles belonging to officers who had testified in her courtroom. As Brennan parked the patrol car, she could see through the windows that the station was relatively busy for this time of night. "Let's go," Cooper said, opening the back door. "Out you come." Sarah waited patiently as they helped her out of the car, their grips still unnecessarily firm on her arms. She kept her head high as they led her toward the station entrance, knowing that several security cameras were recording their every move. As they approached the door, it swung open, and Sergeant David Martinez stepped out. His eyes widened as he recognized Sarah immediately. He had testified in her courtroom just last week about a drug bust case. "What the hell?" Martinez exclaimed, his face showing shock and dismay. "Officers, stop right there." Brennan and Cooper halted, confused by their sergeant's reaction. "Sir?" Brennan questioned, still gripping Sarah's arm. "Remove those cuffs immediately," Martinez ordered, his voice sharp with authority. "Do you have any idea who this is?" "She was resisting during a traffic stop, Sarge," Cooper began to explain, but Martinez cut him off. "This is Judge Thompson, you idiots." Martinez moved quickly to Sarah's side. "Your Honor, I cannot begin to express my apologies." The color drained from both officers' faces as they hurriedly removed the handcuffs. Brennan's hands were shaking so badly he could barely operate the key. "Thank you, Sergeant Martinez," Sarah said calmly, rubbing her sore wrists. "I believe we need to have a serious discussion about what transpired tonight. Would you please ensure that all body camera footage is preserved?" "Of course, Your Honor," Martinez replied, shooting deadly glares at his officers. "Officers Brennan and Cooper, both of you wait in my office. Now." As the two officers shuffled away, looking like scolded schoolchildren, Sarah turned to Martinez. "Sergeant, I'd like to file a formal complaint, and I want every detail of this incident documented. But first, I need to make a phone call to my mother before she worries." Martinez nodded quickly. "You can use my office phone, Your Honor. And again, I am so sorry about this." Sarah straightened her sweater, her dignity intact despite the ordeal. "Don't be sorry, Sergeant. Be ready to make changes, because after tonight, things are going to change in this department." Inside Sergeant Martinez's office, Sarah sat in a comfortable chair while rapidly documenting the events on her phone. The room buzzed with nervous energy as various senior officers hurried in and out, each offering profuse apologies. Word had spread quickly through the station about who had been wrongfully arrested. Chief of Police Robert Wilson arrived within 20 minutes of receiving Martinez's urgent call. His face was grave as he entered the office, already dressed in his full uniform despite the late hour. He had appeared in Sarah's courtroom numerous times over the years, and they had served together on several community oversight committees. "Judge Thompson," Chief Wilson began, his voice heavy with concern, "I came as soon as I heard. This is completely unacceptable." Sarah looked up from her phone, her expression composed but stern. "Chief Wilson, I agree, but what concerns me more is wondering how many other citizens have endured similar treatment without having the privilege of my position to protect them." The chief nodded soberly. "We need your full account of what happened. Officers Brennan and Cooper are being questioned separately right now." "I've already begun writing everything down," Sarah replied, showing him her detailed notes. "The initial stop was made without probable cause. When I questioned the reason for the stop, they claimed my taillight was out. which was false. We can verify that right now if you'd like. Martinez, who had been standing by the door, quickly volunteered. I've already checked her vehicle, Chief. All lights are functioning perfectly. Sarah continued. They escalated the situation when I legally requested a supervisor. Their body cameras should show everything, including excessive force during the arrest and intentionally tight handcuffs. As she spoke, the department's legal advisor, Jennifer Hayes, entered the room with a worried expression. Your Honor, I've reviewed the preliminary reports. This is troubling, to say the least. Troubling doesn't begin to cover it, Sarah responded firmly. I want to see the full body camera footage now. The footage was quickly retrieved and played on the office computer. The room fell silent as they watched the events unfold from the officers' perspectives. The aggressive tone, the unnecessary force, and the mocking comments were all clearly captured. Chief Wilson's face grew increasingly red as he watched. When they reached the part where the officers joked about Sarah's legal knowledge, he paused the video. This is grotesque. Judge Thompson, I want you to know that both officers will face immediate suspension pending a full investigation. That's a start, Sarah said, standing up to her full height. But this goes beyond two officers, Chief Wilson. This is about systemic issues that need to be addressed. I've seen countless cases in my courtroom where citizens report similar treatment, but without video evidence or the credibility of a judge's title, their complaints often go nowhere. The room fell silent as her words sank in. Even Jennifer Hayes, usually quick with legal defenses, remained quiet. I propose a full review of your department's traffic stop procedures, Sarah continued. I want to see comprehensive racial bias training implemented, and I want regular audits of body camera footage, not just when complaints are filed. Chief Wilson nodded slowly. We'll need your help with this, Your Honor. Your perspective, both as a judge and as someone who experienced this firsthand, would be invaluable. I'm willing to help, Sarah agreed, but first, I want to meet with Officers Brennan and Cooper again, this time in my courtroom tomorrow morning. Not for punishment, but for education. They need to understand the impact of their actions, not just on me, but on our entire community. Martinez, who had been taking notes, looked up. What time should I have them report to the courthouse? 9 a.m. sharp, Sarah replied, gathering her belongings. And Chief Wilson, I expect you and your command staff to be present as well. This isn't just about two officers, this is about changing the culture. As Sarah prepared to leave the station, she paused at the door. One more thing. I want all the bystander videos from the scene collected. The community needs to see that when these incidents occur, they will be dealt with transparently and justly. The police leadership watched as she walked out, her dignity intact despite the ordeal. They knew that tomorrow would mark the beginning of a significant change in their department, led by the very judge they had wrongfully arrested. The next morning, courtroom 4 was unusually full by 8:45 a.m. Officers Brennan and Cooper sat in the front row, dressed in their formal uniforms, their faces tense with anxiety. Behind them sat Chief Wilson, Sergeant Martinez, and various other police department leaders. Several local civil rights activists and community leaders had also gathered, having heard about the previous night's events. Sarah arrived through the judge's private entrance at exactly 9 a.m., wearing her judicial robes. The bailiff's voice rang out clear and strong. All rise, the Honorable Judge Sarah Thompson presiding. The room fell silent as Sarah took her seat at the bench. Her expression was composed, but her eyes carried the weight of both personal experience and judicial authority. Be seated, she commanded, her voice firm and clear. This is not a formal hearing. What happens in this room today will impact how our police department serves our community going forward. She turned her attention to Officers Brennan and Cooper. Officers approached the bench. The two men stood slowly, their boots heavy on the courtroom floor as they walked forward. Up close, they looked different from the aggressive officers of the previous night. Younger, almost vulnerable. Last night, Sarah began, you arrested a woman for questioning the legality of a traffic stop. You mocked her knowledge of the law. You used excessive force. And you discovered, to your embarrassment, that she was a judge. But today, we're not here to discuss what you did to Judge Thompson. We're here to discuss what you did to a citizen. Brennan shifted uncomfortably. Your Honor, We want to apologize. Officer Brennan, Sarah interrupted. I'm not interested in apologies yet. I'm interested in understanding. Tell me, what did you see when you looked in my car window last night? Cooper stared at the floor while Brennan struggled to find words. The silence in the courtroom grew heavy. I'll tell you what you saw, Sarah continued. You saw a black woman and made assumptions. Those assumptions led to actions that violated not just my rights, but the very principles you swore to uphold. She opened a folder on her bench. In the past year, I presided over 23 cases involving complaints about traffic stops in our city. 19 of those involved minority citizens. The pattern is clear, but today, we have an opportunity to begin changing it. Chief Wilson stood up from his seat. Your Honor, if I may. Sarah nodded, granting him permission to speak. As of this morning, the chief announced, both officers have been placed on administrative leave pending a full investigation. Additionally, we're implementing immediate changes to our traffic stop protocols and training procedures. That's a start, Sarah acknowledged, but it's not enough. She turned back to the officers. You both will spend the next month working with our community outreach program. You'll meet the people you serve, not as suspects, but as citizens. You'll learn their stories, their fears, and their expectations of law enforcement. Both officers nodded, looking somewhat relieved that their punishment wasn't more severe. Additionally, Sarah continued, you'll assist in developing new training protocols based on your experience. Your mistake can become a teaching tool, but only if you're willing to be honest about what led to it. She picked up her gavel but paused before dismissing the gathering. Let me be clear. What happened last night was a failure, not just of training, but of humanity. Each person who comes before me in this courtroom deserves justice, regardless of their title. Remember that the next time you look through a car window and make assumptions about who's sitting behind it. The gavel struck once, sharp and final. We'll reconvene in 30 days to review your progress. Dismissed. As the courtroom began to clear, Sarah noticed something had changed in the officer's demeanor. The arrogance from the previous night was gone, replaced by what appeared to be genuine reflection. It wasn't just about avoiding punishment anymore. They seemed to truly understand the weight of their actions. Community leaders approached her bench, eager to discuss how this incident could catalyze broader changes. Sarah knew that while one night of injustice had opened eyes, it would take sustained effort to create lasting change. But looking at the chastened officers and the determined faces of department leadership, she felt cautiously optimistic about the path forward. 3 weeks after the courtroom meeting, Judge Sarah Thompson sat in her office reviewing the progress reports from Officers Brennan and Cooper's community service assignments. The thick manila folder on her desk contained detailed accounts of their experiences, reflections, and interactions with local residents. Officer Brennan's latest report caught her attention. He had spent the past week working at a community center in one of Hartford's predominantly black neighborhoods. His writing showed a marked change from his earlier reports. Today, I helped Mrs. Jackson, an elderly resident, carry her groceries home. She told me about her grandson who was wrongfully arrested last year. For the first time, I truly listened instead of defending or explaining. Her story could have been my grandmother's story, if circumstances were different. Sarah set down the report and picked up Officer Cooper's latest submission. He had been assigned to assist at a youth basketball program. The kids were hesitant around me at first. One boy, Marcus, asked why police officers always looked at him suspiciously when he walked home from school. I didn't have a good answer. We ended up talking for an hour after practice. I'd realized I'd been part of the problem he described. A knock at her office door interrupted her reading. Sergeant Martinez entered, carrying a thick binder. Your Honor, I have the first draft of our revised training protocols, he said, placing the binder on her desk. We've incorporated many of the suggestions from community meetings, including extensive sections on implicit bias and de-escalation techniques. Sarah opened the binder, scanning its contents. I see you've added body camera review sessions as regular training components. Yes, Martinez nodded. Every officer will now participate in weekly reviews of random traffic stop footage. We're learning from both good and bad examples. As they discussed the changes, Chief Wilson arrived for their scheduled meeting. He carried a tablet showing the department's latest statistics. Judge Thompson, our traffic stop data from the past 3 weeks shows significant changes, he reported. Discretionary stops are down 40%, and our community feedback ratings have improved. Sarah leaned back in her chair, considering the information. That's promising, but we need to ensure these changes stick. What about the Community Oversight Committee we discussed? We've selected members from various neighborhoods, Chief Wilson replied. They'll start reviewing department policies next month. And, he hesitated briefly, Officers Brennan and Cooper have asked to join as liaison officers. This caught Sarah's attention. Really? Tell me more. They've been transformed by this experience, Martinez added. Yesterday, I overheard Brennan stopping another officer from making the same mistakes they did. He actually quoted your courtroom speech about seeing citizens, not suspects. Sarah smiled slightly, remembering the tension of that day in court. And Cooper? He's requested to lead some of the new training sessions, Chief Wilson responded. He wants to share his experience as a cautionary tale. His exact words were, I want to be part of the solution, not the problem. Looking out her office window at the city below, Sarah reflected on how one difficult night had sparked such significant changes. Her phone buzzed with a text message. It was from Mrs. Jackson at the community center, sending a photo of Officer Brennan playing chess with senior citizens. We're making progress, Sarah acknowledged, but our work isn't done. I want regular updates on these initiatives. The community needs to see consistent improvement, not just temporary changes. Chief Wilson nodded seriously. Agreed. We're planning a series of town hall meetings to maintain dialogue with residents. Would you consider moderating the first one? I'd be honored, Sarah replied, but I want Officers Brennan and Cooper to share their story too. Their transformation could inspire other officers to examine their own biases. As the meeting concluded, Sarah reviewed her calendar for the upcoming weeks. It was filled with not just court sessions, but community meetings, training reviews, and policy discussions. The incident that could have been just another story of police misconduct had instead become a catalyst for real change. Martinez paused at the door before leaving. You know, Judge, what happened that night was terrible, but the changes it's bringing to our department, they're making us better officers, better people. Sarah nodded, thinking of all the citizens who would benefit from these changes. Sometimes, Sergeant, justice works in unexpected ways. We just have to be brave enough to learn from our mistakes. 6 months had passed since the night of Sarah's arrest. The Hartford Police Department's training room was packed with officers from neighboring districts, all gathered to observe the new community engagement program that had emerged from that incident. Officer Mike Brennan stood at the podium, a changed man from the arrogant officer who had made that fateful traffic stop. He spoke with humility to the assembled group. Before that night, I thought I was a good cop. I followed procedures, made arrests, kept the peace, but I didn't understand what true police work meant, serving the community, not controlling it. In the back of the room, Judge Thompson watched quietly. She had been invited to observe the training session, but preferred to maintain a low profile. Next to her sat Officer Cooper, who was taking notes for his own upcoming presentation. Last week, Brennan continued, I responded to a traffic stop. The driver was a young black woman, just like, he paused, glancing at Sarah, just like the incident that changed everything. But this time, I approached with respect. I explained why I stopped her, a genuine taillight issue. I listened when she spoke. The interaction ended with her thanking me for my professionalism. The room fell silent as body camera footage played on the screen, showing the stark difference between Brennan's old and new approaches to traffic stops. Several officers shifted uncomfortably in their seats, recognizing their own behaviors in the before footage. During the break, Sarah overheard conversations between visiting officers. Man, that could have been any of us. I've done the same things without thinking. Maybe we need this training in our department too. Chief Wilson approached Sarah with a thick report in his hand. Judge, the quarterly statistics are in. Civilian complaints are down 65%. Community trust ratings have doubled. Other departments are asking to study our program. Sarah took the report, scanning its pages. And the officers' attitudes? See for yourself. Wilson gestured toward where Brennan and Cooper were engaged in animated discussion with officers from other districts, sharing their experiences openly and honestly. Later that afternoon, Sarah visited the community center where the department now held weekly meetings with residents. The atmosphere was markedly different from 6 months ago. Officers and citizens sat together, sharing coffee and genuine conversation. Mrs. Jackson, the elderly resident who had helped change Brennan's perspective, was teaching a young rookie officer how to play chess. "You know," she said loudly enough for Sarah to hear, "my grandson just got accepted to the police academy. Never thought I'd be happy about that, but times are changing." Cooper, who had been organizing youth sports programs, entered with a group of teenagers. They were laughing together, the fear and suspicion replaced by genuine rapport. One boy spotted Sarah and waved. It was Marcus, the young man who had first made Cooper question his assumptions. "Judge Thompson," Cooper called out, approaching her. "We're planning a community basketball tournament. Officers and residents on mixed teams. Would you consider being our referee?" Sarah smiled, remembering how this same officer had once mocked her legal knowledge. "I'd be honored, Officer Cooper. Just remember, I call fouls as I see them, just like in my courtroom." The local news had picked up on the department's transformation. A reporter was interviewing Chief Wilson near the entrance. "This program is being called the Hartford Model now," the reporter said. "Other cities want to implement it. What made you decide to make such dramatic changes?" Wilson glanced at Sarah before responding. "Sometimes it takes a powerful lesson to show us our blind spots. We were fortunate that our lesson came from someone who chose to help us change rather than simply punish our mistakes." As the day went down, Sarah sat in her office, reviewing applications from other departments wanting to adopt the training program. Her phone buzzed with a text from Brennan. "Just had another successful community meeting. Thank you for seeing past our mistakes that night. You changed more than just 2 officers' lives." Sarah put down her phone and looked at the framed photo on her wall. A group shot from the first community police basketball game. In it, officers and residents smiled together, genuine joy replacing the old tensions. It was proof that sometimes justice worked best not through punishment, but through transformation. 1 year after the fateful traffic stop, the Hartford Justice Center was hosting a national conference on police reform. The main auditorium was filled with police chiefs, community leaders, and government officials from across the country, all eager to learn about what had become known as the Hartford Transformation. Judge Sarah Thompson stood at the podium, surveying the diverse crowd before her. In the front row sat Officers Brennan and Cooper, now promoted to training specialists for their instrumental role in reforming the department. Next to them were community members who had been part of the journey, Mrs. Jackson, young Marcus, and dozens of others who had helped bridge the gap between law enforcement and citizens. 1 year ago, Sarah began, I experienced what too many citizens face every day, bias in action. But what could have been just another sad statistic became something more. Today, I'm not here to discuss that night. I'm here to share what happened afterward. She clicked to the first slide, showing the dramatic improvements in community relations. Our city's police department has become a model for others. Traffic stop complaints have dropped by 80%. Community trust has risen to unprecedented levels, but numbers don't tell the whole story. Sarah gestured to Officers Brennan and Cooper to join her on stage. As they stood beside her, the audience saw not the antagonists from that night, but champions of positive change. These officers, Sarah continued, chose to learn from their mistakes rather than defend them. They became advocates for reform, mentors to new officers, and bridges to our community. Brennan stepped to the microphone. What happened that night showed us our worst instincts, but Judge Thompson's response showed us a better path. We learned that true police work isn't about power, it's about service. Cooper added, Our department now trains officers to see the person first, not the presumed offense. Every traffic stop, every interaction, is an opportunity to build trust rather than enforce authority. From the audience, Chief Wilson raised his hand to share. The Hartford model has been adopted by 12 other cities so far. Early results show similar improvements in community relations and officer job satisfaction. Sarah then invited Mrs. Jackson to the stage. The elderly woman spoke with quiet dignity. A year ago, I wouldn't have believed I'd be standing here praising police officers, but these changes are real. My grandson just graduated from the police academy, trained under this new system. There'll be a different kind of officer. Young Marcus, now high school senior, shared his perspective. Officer Cooper used to be someone I feared. Now he's my mentor. I'm applying to college to study criminal justice because I've seen how the system can change when good people work together. The presentation concluded with a video montage showing the year's achievements: community basketball games, joint volunteer projects, citizen advisory boards in action, and officers engaged in genuine community policing. As the applause died down, Sarah made her final points. The lesson from Hartford isn't just about police reform. It's about how we respond to injustice. We could have settled for punishment and publicity. Instead, we chose transformation and growth. After the conference, Sarah walked through the police station where it had all started. The walls now displayed photos of community events and success stories. Officers greeted citizens with respect and warmth. The tension that had once filled these halls had been replaced by a spirit of cooperation. In her courthouse office later that evening, Sarah reviewed a letter from the Department of Justice. They wanted to implement the Hartford model nationwide. As she considered the proposal, she remembered that night 1 year ago, the fear, the anger, the humiliation. But now those memories were overshadowed by images of positive change. Her phone buzzed with a message from Brennan. "Just finished training another department. Their chief asked how we made such big changes. I told them it started with one traffic stop and a judge who saw beyond her own injustice to create justice for everyone." Sarah smiled, knowing that while the incident that started it all would always be part of her story, it was no longer the most important part. The real story was what happened afterward, when fear turned to understanding, when punishment gave way to progress, and when one night of injustice sparked a movement for lasting change.